Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into the Oyo Empire.
Yeah, the Oyo Empire.
Exactly. And we are going to be learning all about them from excerpts from their Wikipedia article.
It's a good one.
Oh, yeah. Have you read this one before?
I have, yeah, it's a fascinating one. I'm excited to dive in.
Okay, awesome. Well, for all of you listeners out there, we're going to be talking all about this empire, like what made them tick, how they rose to power, how their government worked, how their economy functioned, and then, of course, what ultimately led to their decline.
The classic story arc.
Yeah. So to get us all on the same page, we're talking about the Oyo Empire. They were a Yoruba empire, right?
That's right. Predominantly Yoruba people.
Okay. And they were located in what is today Nigeria.
Yeah, Western Nigeria.
And they weren't some, flash-in-the-pan empire, right? They were around for a while.
No, they were like a major power. And when we say a while, we're talking like centuries, right? Like their origins are going back to something like the 14th century. And they really maintained a lot of prominence and influence in that region for centuries.
So clearly they were doing something right.
Yeah.
In terms of how they set up their system.
Absolutely. When an empire lasts that long, you've got to look at the fundamentals.
So let's talk about those fundamentals. One of the things that really struck me, and I think we should start here, is their political system. Because it wasn't just like, oh, they've got a king and that's that. They had this interesting dynamic, right?
Yeah, very unique. So you're right. They had a king, the Alifin.
Yeah.
But they also had this council of 7 noblemen.
Yeah.
And they were called the Oyo Messi.
Okay, the Oyo Messi. And so what was the dynamic like between these two groups?
It was a true balance of power in a way that's actually kind of remarkable for the time period. So the Alifin was the king, right?
Yeah.
But he wasn't an absolute monarch. He couldn't just do whatever he wanted. The Oyo Messi, they held a significant amount of power too. They could actually check the Alifin's power. Like if they felt he was getting out of line or making bad decisions, they could actually challenge him.
Wow, they could overrule him.
Not overrule exactly, but they could make it very difficult for him to enact his will. It was a system of checks and balances, which is something that we often associate with, modern democracy. But here they were, incorporating that centuries ago.
That's incredible. It speaks to their understanding of, governing and how power really works, right?
And it does. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And it seems like they understood that on a very deep level.
Absolutely. And, it wasn't just their political systems that were sophisticated. These guys were also economic powerhouses. They weren't just sitting around,
Oh, yeah. No, they were, strategically located. They were right smack in the middle of those important trans-Saharan trade routes. So everybody going north and south, they had to pass through their territory.
So they had control of all the goods.
Exactly. And not just any goods. We're talking gold, which was coming up from the south, cola nuts, which were a huge part of their culture and very important.
Essential.
Right. And then, unfortunately, the other thing that was moving along those trade routes was enslaved people caught in the trans-Saharan slave trade.
Yeah.
It's a dark side of history.
Yeah.
But it's true. And the Oyo Empire, unfortunately, they were a part of that. But it does speak to their economic power.
Yeah.
They controlled the trade, and they amassed a lot of wealth and influence because of it.
Absolutely. And so you've got this strong, organized political system. You've got a booming economy. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer that would lead to a pretty formidable military. Yeah.
You put those things together, and you've got the recipe for a powerful empire.
And their military was nothing to sneeze at. I mean, they had this cavalry, right?
Oh, yeah.
Chainmail armor. And get this, horses. Which horses in that region, not super common.
Yeah, not at the time. So for them to have horses, that gave them a huge advantage over their enemies. Because warfare at the time was very much, infantry on infantry. So you can just imagine the sight of these armored warriors on horseback charging into battle.
That's an intimidating sight. And it probably had a huge psychological effect as well.
Oh, 100%. And they were effective, too. You don't become a dominant power in the region without knowing how to use your military. And the Oyo Empire definitely knew how to use theirs. That cavalry, it was key to their expansion and their ability to control such a large territory.
So they had it all, the political system, the economics, the military, everything's firing on all cylinders. But nothing lasts forever, right? So what happened? How did this powerhouse of an empire eventually begin to decline?
Well, like you said, nothing lasts forever. It's almost like a rule, right?
Yeah.
Empires rise and empires fall.
Yeah.
And in the case of the Oyo Empire, it seems like a big part of what led to their decline was actually that political system that we were talking about earlier.
Really?
Yeah, so that whole idea of checks and balances, right?
Oyo Messi.
Yeah, them.
Yeah.
while that system was great for keeping one person, the Aliphan, from becoming
Hmm.
too powerful, it also had this potential downside. Well, it could create instability because you had these different factions, these different centers of power that might not always agree. So while they were supposed to be working together, there was always this potential for power struggles, for infighting, you know.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
And history shows that over time, that's exactly what happened. The Oyo Messi, they became more than just advisors, they became rivals for power. And that internal struggle, that's what really starts to weaken the empire from the inside out.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it's rarely just one thing, right? It's usually a combination of internal and external pressures, right?
Exactly. And the Oyo Empire, they were dealing with a lot of external pressure at the same time that all of this internal stuff was going down. And the big one was the rise of neighboring states, who were also looking to expand their power and influence.
Okay, so who are the major players there?
Well, the big one, the one that really put the pressure on, was the Sokoto Caliphate.
The Sokoto Caliphate, okay.
Yeah, and the Sokoto Caliphate, they were driven by this very powerful Islamic revivalist movement. And in the early 19th century, they launched what's called a jihad. Okay. And a jihad is essentially a struggle to spread their faith and their influence.
Okay.
It's a complex historical concept with a lot of different interpretations. But in this case, the Sokoto Caliphate's jihad was very much about expanding their territory and their power.
Makes sense.
And unfortunately for the Oyo Empire, they were right in the path of this expansion. So you've got the internal struggles with the Oyo Messi, and then you've got this external pressure from the Sokoto Caliphate, and eventually it just became too much. The Oyo Empire, weakened from within and under attack from without, they just couldn't hold on.
Yeah.
And so their empire, this once great power, eventually crumbled.
It's kind of a classic story, right? The rise and fall of empires. But, you know, even though we know how the story ends, it doesn't make it any less fascinating to learn about, right?
Totally agree. And I think the Oyo Empire, they're a great example of how even the most powerful empires, the ones with sophisticated systems and a long history of success, they're not invincible. They're all vulnerable to internal and external pressures. And those pressures, they can often be their undoing. It makes me think, like, what were some of the things that the Oyo Empire could have done differently? Could they have reformed their political system? Could they have found a way to withstand the Sokoto Caliphate's expansion? It's a question that historians are still debating today.
It's something to ponder.
Right. And that's what makes history so interesting. It's not just a bunch of names and dates. It's a chance to learn from the past and maybe even apply those lessons to the present.
Totally.
So there you have it, the Oyo Empire, a powerful force in West Africa for centuries. But like all empires, their time eventually came to an end. I think their story is a good reminder that power is fleeting and nothing lasts forever.
It's a good reminder.
But they left a lasting legacy on the region, that's for sure.
They did. So to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Oyo Empire.
Yeah, thanks for coming along.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll see you on our next deep dive. See you next time.